My name's Reagan. I'm going to teach you how to use a DSLR today. So I'm going to go over the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO settings to get an ideal picture. Really, it's depending on what you're shooting and what you want it to look like. And that's why manual mode is so great, because you can really get a fine tuning to specifically what you're looking for. So I'm just going to go through the settings and kind of do some extremes so you know how the settings affect the image. And then I'll put in some demo pictures as well as we do this. What I would consider a pretty basic ISO for like a cloudy day right now would be 200 ISO or 400 depending on how cloudy it is. The lower ISO number, the less grain you're going to get, but also the less sensitive the camera is to light, so it's not going to be as bright. Higher ISO, you're going to get a grainier image and it's going to be bright. All right, aperture. So the smaller the number on the aperture is, say an f-stop of 2.0, it is going to be a brighter image, but the depth of field is going to be more shallow. Therefore, there's going to be less things in focus, but you can have focused on one thing and get that really sharp. A pretty standard, I would say, is f5. You're going to get still that artistic look where there's a shallow depth of field, but you're also going to get a good amount of things in focus. And then shutter speed, a pretty average setting for shutter speed would be 1/160. You're going to freeze some things, but it's also not going to make your image too dark, and then things won't be really blurry. All right, so I'm just going to test out a few settings on here just so you get a feel of how these affect an image visually. Okay, so the first image is a slow shutter speed. You have to bring up the aperture in order to keep the picture from being overexposed, but it's going to have a more blurry image. Next, I'll show you a really fast shutter speed. What you're going to see is it freezes the subject in frame. It also makes the image a little darker if you don't account for that in your other settings. You really have to work with all three at the same time to make sure that you get the ideal image for yourself. Okay, next I'm going to show you a very wide aperture, therefore a small number on the F. I know that's really confusing. It takes a little getting used to. These aren't like professional photos or anything, it's just right out the window, but I want you to have the same setting, and so you're able to see how the settings can affect just a single scene here. So this next picture is a very wide aperture with a low number. Okay, so this next image, you're gonna see that everything in frame is basically in focus, and that is what you get with a very small aperture. Therefore, a big number on the F, you gotta remember that. And then lastly, I'm gonna show you a very high ISO and why personally I would not. Just steer away from it unless you're going for a certain look with the grain. I mean, it's personal, but if you're gonna do that, just shoot on film. Okay, so now it's the high ISO picture. Obviously, it's kind of disgusting. That's why you want to steer away from having a high ISO. Instead, if you need more light in your image, what you would do, because we already know the other settings now, is you would either take your shutter speed down some if you can account in that way, or you would make your aperture a smaller number, therefore wider, because you're going to let more light in. And just to finish it off, I'll show you the low ISO, even though we kind of stayed on a low ISO throughout the whole tutorial here. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to go through the different settings and show you how it affects the pictures in camera rather than post-production. Yes, hopefully you learned something.